It was a cool and quiet morning in the city. The tall courthouse building stood in the center of downtown, surrounded by busy streets and small shops that were just opening for the day. Inside the courthouse, the hallways were slowly filling with people. Some were lawyers in dark suits carrying heavy files, some were families waiting nervously for their hearings, and others were ordinary citizens who had come to deal with small legal matters. The atmosphere was serious but calm, like most mornings in a courthouse where people hoped their problems would finally be solved. Among the people waiting that morning was a young black woman named Angela Morris. Angela was 30 years old and lived in a small apartment on the other side of the city with her younger brother, Marcus. Life had never been easy for Angela. After their parents passed away years earlier, she became the one responsible for taking care of Marcus. She worked long hours every day, sometimes at a grocery store in the morning and at a small restaurant in the evening, just to make sure they had enough money for rent, food, and school supplies. Angela was not used to going to court. In fact, she had never been inside a courthouse before that day. The only reason she was there was because of a confusing situation involving a parking ticket. A few months earlier, she had parked her car near her workplace while rushing to her evening shift. When she returned, she found a ticket on her windshield. She planned to pay it later, but between work, bills, and taking care of Marcus, she forgot about it. Over time, the small fine turned into a larger legal issue, and eventually she received a letter asking her to appear in court. The letter made Angela very nervous. She had never broken the law and always tried to do the right thing. The thought of standing in front of a judge made her anxious, but she knew she had to go and explain her situation honestly. That morning, Angela woke up very early. She carefully chose a simple blue dress that looked neat and respectful. She wanted to show the judge that she was serious and responsible. Before leaving the apartment, she made breakfast for Marcus and reminded him to get ready for school. "Don't worry about me," she told him with a small smile. "I'll be back before the evening." Marcus looked worried, but he trusted his sister. Angela grabbed a small folder that contained the ticket notice, her work schedule, and a few papers she thought might help explain the situation. Then she left for the courthouse. When Angela arrived, she felt a little overwhelmed. The building was much larger than she expected. The tall ceilings, long hallways, and serious faces of people around her made her feel small and nervous. She quietly walked to the hallway outside the courtroom listed on her letter and sat on one of the wooden benches. People around her were whispering to their lawyers or looking at their phones. Some looked calm, but others looked extremely worried. Angela tried to stay calm by reading the papers in her folder again and again, making sure she understood everything she planned to say. After about 20 minutes of waiting, Angela's phone vibrated in her hand. It was a call from Marcus. She quickly answered because she knew he was probably getting ready to leave for school. "Hey Marcus," she said softly, trying not to disturb anyone around her. Marcus sounded a little nervous. He asked if everything was okay and if Angela was already in court. Angela smiled gently even though he couldn't see her. She reassured him that everything was fine and that she was just waiting for her name to be called. She told him to focus on school and promised that she would bring his favorite snacks home later. While Angela was finishing the call, two police officers responsible for courthouse security walked into the hallway. Their job was to make sure everything stayed orderly and quiet. One of the officers noticed Angela speaking on the phone and immediately walked toward her with a serious expression. "Phones are not allowed here," he said in a strict voice. Angela looked up quickly. "I'm sorry, officer," she replied politely. "I was just ending the call." She turned slightly away and said quickly into the phone, "Marcus, I'll call you later." Then she ended the call and placed the phone in her bag. But the officer seemed irritated. Perhaps he had already had a stressful morning, or perhaps he misunderstood Angela's calm tone as disrespect. "I told you to stop the call immediately," he said more loudly. Angela looked confused because she had already ended the call. She tried to explain politely that she was only telling her brother goodbye. However, before she could finish her sentence, the officer suddenly lost his patience. Without warning, he raised his hand and slapped Angela across the face. The sound echoed through the hallway. People nearby gasped in shock. Conversations stopped instantly. Several people stood up from the benches, unable to believe what they had just seen. Angela froze in place. Her cheek burned with pain, but the emotional shock was even stronger. She had never been treated like that in public before, especially not in a place that was supposed to represent justice and fairness. Slowly, she lifted her hand to her cheek, trying to understand what had just happened. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not shout or argue. She simply stood there, embarrassed and stunned as dozens of people stared. In that shocking moment, something deeply troubling had just occurred. Right there in the courthouse hallway, in front of witnesses and cameras, the police slapped a black woman in front of everyone in court, but moments later, they would deeply regret their actions. What no one realized yet was that this single moment was about to change the entire morning, not just for Angela, but for everyone who had witnessed it. For a few long seconds after the slap, the entire hallway became completely silent. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy and uncomfortable, as if everyone was holding their breath at the same time. The sound of the slap had echoed through the courthouse corridor, and people who had been talking only moments earlier suddenly stopped speaking. Some people looked shocked, some looked confused, and others simply stared, unsure of what to do next. Angela stood still near the bench where she had been sitting just moments earlier. Her hand slowly moved to her cheek, which was still burning from the sudden strike. The pain was real, but the embarrassment and disbelief were even stronger. She had come to court hoping to solve a simple problem about a parking ticket, but now she had become the center of a humiliating moment in front of strangers. Angela tried to stay calm. Her heart was beating fast, and tears had started to fill her eyes, but she did not shout or argue. She had always believed that reacting with anger often made situations worse, especially when dealing with authority figures. So she took a deep breath and looked down at the folder in her hands, trying to steady herself. Around her, people began whispering quietly. A middle-aged woman sitting on the bench shook her head in disbelief. A young man standing near the wall looked angry but unsure if he should say something. Everyone had seen what happened, but no one had expected something like that to occur inside a courthouse. The police officer who had slapped Angela stepped back slightly. At first, his face still looked strict and confident, as if he believed he had done nothing wrong. His partner, another officer standing a few steps behind him, looked uncomfortable. He had also seen everything clearly, and his expression showed that he knew the situation had gone too far. But he remained silent, perhaps not wanting to challenge his fellow officer in front of everyone. At the far end of the hallway, sitting on a wooden bench near a large window, a young law student named Daniel Brooks had also witnessed the entire event. Daniel was 24 years old and had been visiting the courthouse that morning as part of his legal training. His university often encouraged law students to observe real court proceedings so they could understand how the justice system worked in real life. Daniel had arrived early that morning with his backpack, laptop, and phone, ready to take notes and watch different cases throughout the day. Before the incident happened, Daniel had been recording a short video on his phone for his own learning purposes. He sometimes liked to capture small moments around the courthouse, people walking through the hallways, lawyers preparing their files, or the general environment of the legal system in action. When the officer approached Angela, Daniel's phone camera was still recording quietly. At first, he was not paying close attention to their conversation because it seemed like a normal interaction between courthouse security and a visitor. But then the unexpected slap happened right in front of his camera. Daniel's eyes widened as he looked at the screen. He quickly realized that the phone had captured the entire moment clearly. For a second, he felt nervous. Situations involving police officers were serious, and he was only a student. But at the same time, Daniel understood something important. If nobody spoke up, the truth might never be known. The officer might simply claim that Angela had caused trouble, and people might believe him because he was wearing a uniform. Daniel looked again at the video he had just recorded. The footage showed Angela standing calmly, ending her phone call, and then the sudden slap that no one expected. It was clear and undeniable. Daniel quietly saved the video on his phone, making sure it would not be lost. Meanwhile, the quiet whispers in the hallway were slowly growing louder. Some people were discussing what they had just seen, while others were looking toward Angela with sympathy. A man standing near the door murmured that the officer had overreacted. Another person shook their head and said that no one deserved to be treated like that, especially for something as small as a phone call. Inside the courtroom nearby, the noise from the hallway began to attract attention. The courtroom door opened slightly, and a clerk looked outside to see what was happening. Soon after, the judge herself, Rebecca Lawson, stepped out into the hallway. Judge Lawson was known for being fair, calm, and very observant. She had been working in the legal system for many years and believed strongly that respect and justice should always guide the behavior of everyone inside a courthouse. When Judge Lawson stepped into the hallway, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. People quickly stopped whispering when they saw her. Her presence commanded attention and seriousness. She looked around the hallway and noticed Angela standing quietly with her hand on her cheek. The judge's eyes then moved toward the police officers standing nearby. "What is going on here?" Judge Lawson asked in a calm but firm voice. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the officer who had slapped Angela quickly stepped forward and tried to explain the situation. He said that the woman had been using her phone and refusing to follow instructions. According to him, he had only acted to maintain order in the courthouse. Angela remained silent, still holding her folder and trying to gather her thoughts. She was not sure if anyone would believe her side of the story. But before the judge could return inside the courtroom, Daniel stood up from his seat at the end of the hallway. His hands felt slightly shaky, but he knew this was an important moment. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward the judge. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, holding his phone carefully, "I think you should see this. I recorded what happened." The hallway became quiet again. All eyes turned toward Daniel and the phone in his hand. The officer's confident expression slowly began to fade as he realized that someone might have captured the truth. Judge Lawson looked at Daniel for a moment and then nodded seriously. She asked him to bring the video inside the courtroom so she could watch it immediately. She also asked Angela to come inside so the situation could be properly reviewed. For the first time since the shocking moment in the hallway, Angela felt a small sense of hope. Someone had seen the truth, and maybe now the truth would finally be heard. None of them knew yet how powerful that small video would soon become. The courtroom became very quiet as Angela, the two police officers, and Daniel walked inside. The large wooden doors slowly closed behind them, and the people who had been sitting in the courtroom looked up with curiosity. Only a few minutes earlier, the room had been filled with the normal sounds of legal work, papers turning, quiet conversations between lawyers, and the soft tapping of keyboards from court staff. But now everyone could sense that something unusual was happening. Judge Rebecca Lawson took her seat at the front of the courtroom. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed that she was paying very close attention. She had worked in the justice system for many years, and she understood that moments like this required patience and fairness. She looked at Angela first. Angela stood quietly near one of the benches, still holding her folder of papers. Her cheek was still slightly red, and although she was trying to remain strong, the embarrassment of what had happened in the hallway was still fresh in her mind. Daniel stood nearby with his phone in his hand. His heart was beating fast. He had never spoken directly in a courtroom before, especially not in front of a judge. But he reminded himself that he was simply there to show the truth. The two police officers stood on the other side of the room. The officer who had slapped Angela earlier no longer looked as confident as he had in the hallway. His arms were folded tightly, and his face showed signs of nervousness. His partner stood quietly beside him, avoiding eye contact with the judge. Judge Lawson gently tapped her pen on the desk and spoke in a calm voice. She asked Daniel to step forward and explain what he had recorded. Daniel respectfully approached the front of the courtroom and handed his phone to one of the court clerks, who connected it to a screen so everyone could see the video clearly. The room became completely silent as the video began to play. The recording showed the courthouse hallway exactly as it had looked earlier that morning. People were sitting on benches, some looking at their phones, others talking quietly. Then Angela appeared in the frame, sitting calmly with her folder in her hands. A few seconds later, the police officer approached her. The video showed their brief conversation. Angela's voice was soft and respectful as she finished her phone call. She clearly apologized and placed her phone away. Then, without warning, the officer suddenly raised his hand and slapped her across the face. A quiet gasp spread through the courtroom as the video ended. There was no confusion about what had happened. The recording clearly showed that Angela had not been aggressive or disrespectful. She had simply been finishing a short phone call with her younger brother. The officer's reaction had been sudden and unnecessary. Judge Lawson watched the video twice. She wanted to be absolutely certain about every detail before speaking. When the screen finally went dark, she looked directly at the officer. "Officer," she said firmly, "do you have anything you would like to explain about what we have just seen?" The officer shifted uncomfortably where he stood. For a moment, he looked as if he was searching for the right words. Earlier in the hallway, he had confidently claimed that Angela was refusing to follow instructions. But now the video had shown a very different story. He cleared his throat and tried to speak calmly. He said that he had believed Angela was ignoring his authority and that he reacted quickly to maintain order. However, even as he spoke, it was clear that his explanation did not match what everyone had just seen. Judge Lawson listened carefully without interrupting. When the officer finished, she folded her hands on the desk and looked around the courtroom. "This courthouse is a place where justice and respect must always come first," she said slowly. "Every person who enters this building deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they are a lawyer, a witness, or a citizen appearing for a simple matter." Angela stood quietly, listening to the judge's words. For the first time since the incident, she felt that someone truly understood what she had experienced. Judge Lawson then turned her attention to Angela's original reason for being in court. She asked Angela to come forward and explain the situation about the parking ticket. Angela nervously walked to the front and handed her folder to the clerk. Inside were copies of the ticket notice, her work schedule, and a written explanation she had prepared the night before. The judge carefully reviewed the documents. As she looked through the papers, it became clear that Angela had not ignored the ticket intentionally. The fine had grown larger simply because the notices had been sent to an old address after she moved apartments. By the time Angela received the final letter, the issue had already been scheduled for a court appearance. After reviewing everything, Judge Lawson nodded thoughtfully. "It appears that this situation could have been resolved much earlier," she said. "Miss Morris has provided clear evidence that this was a misunderstanding." Within minutes, the judge dismissed the entire case. Angela's parking fine and all additional penalties were removed. The courtroom clerk updated the records immediately. Angela felt a wave of relief wash over her. The stress that had been building for weeks suddenly disappeared. But even more meaningful than the case dismissal was what happened next. Judge Lawson looked directly at Angela and spoke sincerely. "Miss Morris, on behalf of this court, I want to apologize for the way you were treated in this building today. That behavior does not represent the values of justice that we stand for." The courtroom remained silent as the judge continued speaking. She ordered the courthouse administration to begin an official review of the officer's actions. The video would be included as part of the investigation, and the situation would be examined carefully. The officer's face had now turned pale. What had started as a moment of anger in the hallway had suddenly become a serious professional mistake. He realized that the consequences could affect his career, his reputation, and the trust people placed in the law. Meanwhile, Angela slowly returned to her seat, feeling both exhausted and relieved. The truth had finally been seen, and for the first time that morning, she felt that justice had truly spoken. For several long seconds after Sarah's words, the small room became completely silent. Victor stood still, looking at the tiny baby in Sarah's arms. The powerful mafia boss who controlled many dangerous men and huge businesses suddenly felt something unfamiliar in his heart. He had faced guns, enemies, and life-threatening situations without fear, but now he felt nervous and emotional at the same time. Victor slowly moved closer. Adam was still crying softly, his small hands moving in the air. Sarah gently tried to calm him, but the baby was hungry and tired. Victor looked at the baby's face carefully. The more he looked, the more he could see something familiar. Adam's eyes looked very much like his own. Victor quietly pulled the old wooden chair closer and sat down. The chair made a small creaking sound because it was very old. The expensive suit he was wearing looked strange in that small poor room. Everything around him was simple and worn out, but at that moment he did not care about comfort or luxury. Sarah stood near the bed, holding Adam carefully. She still looked confused and nervous because she did not expect Victor to appear suddenly after so many months. She had imagined many different situations in her mind about what might happen if Victor ever returned, but this moment felt unreal. Victor looked at Sarah and spoke in a calm voice. "Why didn't you try to contact me again?" Sarah looked down for a moment before answering. "I tried in the beginning," she said softly. "But your number stopped working. People at the nightclub said you disappeared. After some time I stopped trying." Victor listened quietly. He remembered those days clearly. His enemies were trying to destroy his organization at that time. Several attacks had already happened, and many people around him were in danger. He had believed that leaving Sarah alone was the safest choice for her. But now he could see the painful result of that decision. Victor looked around the room again. There was almost no food in the kitchen corner, and the refrigerator looked empty. A small bottle of water and a few pieces of bread were lying on the table. Seeing that made Victor feel a heavy weight in his chest. "You were struggling like this all this time?" he asked slowly. Sarah gave a small tired smile. "Life is not easy, but I manage somehow," she replied. "Adam is healthy, and that is what matters most." Victor admired her strength. Many people in his world were surrounded by wealth but still complained about small problems. But Sarah had faced real difficulties and still remained calm and strong. Adam suddenly cried louder again. Sarah looked worried and gently rocked him in her arms. "He is hungry," she said quietly. "I was trying to borrow a little money from my friend to buy milk." Victor remembered the message again. The message asking for only $10. $10. For Victor, $10 meant almost nothing. But for Sarah it meant food for her baby. Victor slowly stood up and walked closer to Sarah. "Can I hold him?" he asked carefully. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then she slowly placed Adam into Victor's arms. Victor held the baby very carefully, almost afraid to move too quickly. Adam was small and warm, and his tiny fingers grabbed the edge of Victor's jacket. The crying slowly became softer as the baby looked curiously at Victor's face. For the first time in many years, Victor felt something powerful that had nothing to do with money or control. He felt like a father. Victor gently touched Adam's head and looked at Sarah. "I should have been here," he said honestly. "You should not have faced all of this alone." Sarah did not blame him. She simply said, "Your life is dangerous. I didn't want Adam to grow up in that world." Victor understood her fear. His life was full of risks, enemies, and dark business. But at that moment he realized something important. If he continued living the same way, he might lose the chance to know his own son. Victor carefully gave Adam back to Sarah and took out his phone. Within minutes he made several phone calls. His assistant Marco answered immediately. "Find a safe apartment for Sarah and the baby," Victor said firmly. "Somewhere clean, quiet, and secure. Also arrange everything they need: food, clothes, medical care." Marco did not ask questions. "It will be done tonight," he replied. Victor ended the call and looked back at Sarah. She was staring at him with surprise. "You don't have to do all that," she said softly. "I only asked for $10. Victor shook his head gently. "That message did more than ask for money," he said. "It reminded me of something I forgot." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" Victor looked at Adam, who was now calmer in Sarah's arms. "For many years I believed power and money were the most important things in life," Victor explained quietly. "But tonight I realized that my own son was hungry, and I didn't even know he existed. That means something in my life was very wrong." Sarah listened silently. Victor continued speaking, his voice calm but serious. "Things will change now. I will make sure you and Adam are safe and comfortable. You will never have to worry about food or rent again." Sarah did not know what to say. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She had been carrying all her struggles alone for so long that it felt strange to suddenly receive help. Outside, the city continued its busy night. Cars passed on distant roads, and lights shined in tall buildings. But inside that small poor apartment, something important had happened. A simple mistake message had brought a father back into his child's life. Sometimes life changes not because of big plans or powerful decisions, but because of one small message sent at the right moment.